If all the world's data were to suddenly vanish tomorrow, modern society would grind to an immediate halt. Writing is far more than a collection of symbols. It is humanity's first external memory. Our contemporary reliance on information storage technology actually began thousands of years ago, the very moment our ancestors abandoned a nomadic existence to bind their lives to permanent settlements. The transition from hunter-gatherer bands to settled agricultural societies triggered an unprecedented crisis. As populations surged, the need to manage food resources and labor became urgent. The human biological memory evolved over millions of years to recall trails, the faces of kin, and the utility of various plants, began to buckle under the weight of complex data regarding crop yields, taxation, and the distribution of accumulated assets. A prime example lies within the temples of ancient Uruk in Mesopotamia. There, storekeepers faced the monumental pressure of managing thousands of baskets of grain and vast herds of livestock. In a system operating solely on individual memory, a single lapse by a storekeeper could lead to the collapse of the entire food supply chain for an entire city. Our raw brain power was simply not engineered to process such immense volumes of data with absolute precision. The emergence of clay tokens, used to represent physical goods, served as the most primitive precursor to the history of writing. This was the moment information was first detached from the human mind and anchored to a tangible, external object. No longer restricted by the limitations of biological memory, humans began to master the storage of data regarding the quantity and type of goods outside the body. The pressure of commercial transactions with strangers, people with whom we share no ancestral bond, forced humanity to forge a common language. It became a method of ensuring that a deal struck today would retain its validity tomorrow, regardless of who held the information. The development of symbolic systems was therefore no longer merely a cultural choice, but a prerequisite for survival, preventing chaos as community scale surpassed the limitations of the face-to-face relationships that had sustained us for tens of thousands of years. The shift from trusting the memory of an individual to trusting a physical recording system marked a profound turning point. This was when humans began to externalize their capacity for thought and management, transforming writing into the bedrock of knowledge and power, and a tool that defines our identity as a species. Once capable of stable information storage, society was compelled to advance further, leading to the birth of an economic system for the exchange of information and goods. What are your thoughts on the future of information in this new era? Is artificial intelligence destined to become the next iteration of writing? Subscribe to our newsletter to continue exploring the origins of currency and the exchange of value with us. The inception of a journey marked by intellect did not begin with flowery prose or classical philosophical treatises, but rather from the most fundamental human need for survival, counting and recording information regarding assets. At the dawn of civilized evolution, as human society transitioned from hunter-gatherer bands to settled agriculture, the human brain confronted a tangible limit. Biological memory, however sophisticated, proved insufficient to retain the quantities of cattle, grain, or the daily transactions occurring within increasingly sprawling communities. That was the historical moment when writing began to emerge as an essential tool for social management, the first form of exosomic memory humanity created to alleviate the burden on cognitive thought. The first step in this journey was the use of representational drawings, or pictograms. Ancient artisans experimented with the most intuitive method, drawing a tree to represent a tree, or a bull to denote the animal itself. This rudimentary approach proved effective for inventorying simple, tangible assets. Yet a barrier immediately arose when humans needed to express more abstract concepts such as love, justice, or courage, or complex actions that could not be encapsulated by a fixed sketch. A single image lacked the capacity to convey the fluidity of time, mood, or cause and effect relationships. This impasse forced humans to think further, to move beyond the limits of merely replicating the physical world onto material surfaces. To overcome the limitations of imagery, the development of structured symbols was born. Humans began to detach images from their original meanings, assigning those symbols specific sounds or surrogate concepts, a turning point known as phoneticization. This was a leap forward in the technology of writing, transforming silent marks into entities capable of resonance, directly transcribing spoken language into written language. In Mesopotamia, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians pioneered this technique. Initially, they utilized simple incisions on wet clay tablets to tally quantities of grain or livestock. Yet, from those sterile inventory symbols, they gradually evolved a complex system of cuneiform, using sharp-tipped styli to etch clay, creating characters capable of recording epic legends such as Gilgamesh, preserving the aspirations and fears of ancient humanity across time and space. The significance of standardizing symbols cannot be understated in this process. A society can only function with stability and communicate effectively when every member of the community reaches a consensus that the symbol X always denotes the value Y. This uniformity transformed meaningless notches into a system of law, an economic commitment, or a credible contract. It was this standardization that forged the document, an instrument that defines power and knowledge. When a community adheres to a common writing convention, they simultaneously establish an invisible network of connection, allowing knowledge to be transmitted and stored without being distorted by the fallible memory of individuals. This is how social management began to escape its reliance on individual rulers, shifting toward the governance of objective, written systems. Not exclusive to Mesopotamia, the need for record-keeping was an inevitable outcome of human development, manifesting as an objective law across different geographies. In Egypt, a system of hieroglyphs was formed to serve religious needs and centralized state administration. In the Indus Valley, exquisite seals bearing characters not yet fully deciphered also reveal a high level of economic management. In China, oracle bone script was carved into turtle shells and animal bones for the purposes of divination and preserving royal genealogies. The simultaneous emergence of these needs for writing across these cradles of civilization reveals a fundamental truth. When a society reaches a certain degree of complexity, record-keeping is no longer a choice, but a vital requirement for the survival of that civilization. The decisive transition from an image-based system to phoneticization or syllable-based writing truly unlocked the ability to record the entirety of human speech. This held profound humanitarian significance. Writing was no longer restricted to mundane inventory lists of food or property. It began to capture the breath of life itself. Oaths, royal decrees, prayers to the divine, and stories told by the hearth. At this point, writing possessed the capacity to serve as a mirror reflecting the human soul, where every nuance of emotion and knowledge could be frozen for future generations to behold. To increase the efficiency and speed of communication, the streamlining of writing became an urgent requirement. Ancient scribes, the keepers of the keys to knowledge and power, constantly optimized the system of symbols. Intricate drawings, which took time to craft, were gradually distilled into simple characters that were easy to remember and quick to record. This simplification not only accelerated information processing, but played a pivotal role in reducing barriers to information access. As writing became more accessible and easier to learn, it ceased to be the absolute privilege of the elite, thereby paving the way for the broader dissemination of knowledge throughout society. Looking back at this journey, we realize that writing was, in essence, a cognitive revolution. It was not merely a tool to record events, but a method for humans to observe themselves, manage themselves, and forge their own cultural identities. Those clay tablets, turtle shell fragments, and ancient papyri are not simply data. They are pieces of the history of evolutionary thought. When humans began to write, they learned to separate their identities from their bodies, creating a parallel existence where information could live independently and more eternally than those who created it. In this process, power no longer resided solely in physical strength or tangible wealth, but shifted gradually toward the ability to possess, store, and interpret text. Those who knew how to write held the past, controlled the present, and directed the future. The evolution from image to symbol system was not just a technical advancement, but a step forward in the capacity for abstraction, where humanity learned to encode the world into tiny symbols that held the power to transform an entire civilization. Have you ever wondered, if we were to strip away this system of writing, how long would current civilization survive before collapsing into the darkness of oblivion? Perhaps that is the moment we realize that we are not merely biological creatures, but textual ones, entities that exist through a network of information intricately woven over the last several thousand years. Writing is the tool that defines the human identity, a necessary step leading to the demand for a stricter system of economic value, intended for the more precise exchange of information and goods. Let us reflect on the future of information in the digital age we inhabit today. Is artificial intelligence, with its ability to process data far beyond the capacity of any ancient scribe, becoming the next form of writing? Or is it merely a new veneer masking the same primitive needs from the beginning of time? If writing is humanity's exosomatic memory, then AI is an exosomatic brain that is becoming increasingly independent and sophisticated. Are we moving toward an era where information no longer requires humans to store it? The emergence of writing was far more than a mere technical advancement in information storage. It inadvertently erected an invisible yet formidable barrier between individuals within the same community. As humanity transitioned from oral to textual societies, a new power divide began to take shape. Those who mastered the skills of reading and writing ascended to an elite status, the sole possessors of the ability to access, decode, and manipulate the laws governing the universe, the divine, and the rigid regulations of the state. Where once a person's standing relied on memory, practical experience, or the wisdom articulated in face-to-face discourse, authority now shifted toward the mastery of inscriptions on hard surfaces. Knowledge ceased to be a communal asset, evolving instead into an exclusive tool, a sharp political weapon that profoundly stratified the structure of society. One inevitable consequence of this shift was the birth of complex bureaucratic machinery. Early states, with their growing populations, could not function stably without a centralized management system. Maintaining order, controlling taxation, and managing military archives became urgent necessities. The longevity of ancient dynasties became inextricably linked to the emergence of a literate class of bureaucrats, the masters of the script. They functioned as the gatekeepers of information, tasked with translating the abstract decrees of rulers into concrete, tangible records. In this system, power resided not in the hands of those wielding spears on the battlefield, but in the hands of those recording resources, grain stores, and the rolls of those subject to conscription. As state administration became a game played with numbers and documents, those outside the circle of literacy lost all capacity to understand, challenge, or intervene in the policies directly shaping their lives. Examining the historical imprint of Babylon's Code of Hammurabi, we clearly see how writing served as a medium of supreme power. Carving laws into massive stone stelae placed in public squares was not simply an act of preservation, it was a calculated performance of authority. By physicalizing the law in stone, the ruler did not merely assert that the code was immutable and divine. He created an illusion of transparency and justice. While in reality, the vast majority of the population remained illiterate and unable to read the inscriptions, the sheer presence of the looming monoliths exerted a profound psychological pressure. Here, writing functioned as a reminder that the law was fixed, packaged, and placed on a pedestal that ordinary people could admire but never reach. This stands as a stark testament that writing was used not only to store information, but to exert control over social consciousness. The power of the written word also lies in its ability to manipulate the flow of history. In the hands of the ruling class, text became a potent instrument for molding the past. Victories were magnified, and bitter defeats were scrubbed from royal records, crafting epic narratives designed to foster cult-like devotion to the reigning dynasty. Subsequent generations, reading these accounts, would believe them to be the singular truth. Without counter-evidence, history became a plaything for the ruler. This control over information established a new form of power, the authority to define the identity of an entire people. When a civilization writes its own narrative, it simultaneously constructs barriers that prevent others from perceiving the truth of its failures or its darker dimensions. The illiterate, therefore, were stripped of political power in a total sense. In the world of administrative documents, their voices simply did not exist. If you did not appear on the tax rolls, the land distribution lists, or legal statutes, you were, in political terms, practically invisible. The development of the written record fundamentally altered how humans remembered their origins. Before the age of writing, genealogies and ancestral stories were passed down through generations via songs and myths, a process deeply rooted in communal connection. However, as the archival system rose to dominance, the individual became entirely dependent on the genealogical lists maintained in royal treasuries. We ceased to remember our ancestors through shared emotion and experience, relying instead on the sterile lines inscribed on parchment. The social consequence of this knowledge ownership was its packaging and selective distribution. Power no longer rested with the strongest, the bravest, or the most experienced, but with those possessing the keys to decode the texts, the keys to knowledge. Once knowledge could be packaged, it became easier to transmit, yet simultaneously easier to block, restrict, or manipulate by the forces presiding over libraries and archives. This social stratification persisted for millennia, creating an unbridgeable chasm of wealth and power. Illiteracy became a valuable form of capital, allowing the elite to occupy positions of social management. This led to the creation of rudimentary education systems, yet these were almost exclusively reserved for the aristocracy or those trained to serve the state apparatus. Meanwhile, the general populace remained submerged in illiteracy, viewing the ability to read and write as a form of potent magic forever beyond their reach. It was this stratification that defined hierarchical societal structures, where those at the pinnacle of the pyramid were the possessors of knowledge, and those at the base were the executors of orders transcribed in text. Ultimately, writing completely redefined human identity. We were no longer creatures of the present moment, but subjects connected to the past and directed toward the future through stored data. Yet this immense power always carries the risk of manipulation. Once we have built a society based on the ability to store information, the subsequent question is not merely what we store, but who holds the authority to decide what is preserved and what is relegated to oblivion. When a society achieves the capacity to store complex information, the emergence of an economic value system to quantify our exchanges becomes an inevitable next step. Writing does not just record laws, it records debts, assets, and commitments. This is the very premise for the development of monetary systems and the complex exchange of value that we utilize today. Let us reflect on this trajectory. In this modern technological era, is AI becoming the next form of writing? A new externalized brain that is redefining the power and knowledge of humanity? We welcome your thoughts on this topic. Please subscribe to our newsletter to ensure you do not miss our upcoming documentary episodes, where we will decode the nature of currency and the ways economic values have shaped the world. The transition from oral to written thought was not merely a change in recording medium. It was a total overhaul of the human cognitive architecture. Before the advent of writing, biological memory served our only archive. Our ancestors were compelled to weave information into stories, songs, and rituals to ensure that knowledge did not perish with each passing generation. The brain was then a living library, where every individual bore the heavy burden of preserving the culture of the entire community. However, the emergence of writing fundamentally altered this game. It introduced an exosomatic technology, an external memory that allowed humanity to liberate cognitive resources previously consumed by the sheer labor of memorization. Observe how a modern brain processes information. Freed from the need to repeatedly recite thousands of data points to ensure their survival, human intelligence began to navigate new, abstract frontiers. The alleviation of the memory burden carved out a precious void for complex logical deduction. Philosophy, science, and mathematics did not bloom by accident. They were the fruits of a brain liberated from the pressure of raw storage, allowing it to shift into a mode of deep analysis. Writing provided thought with a stable arena where ideas could be tested, revised, and debated without being distorted by the frailty of forgetting or the fluidity of human subjectivity. Yet, this progress carries an ironic paradox. While writing allows information to exist eternally, it silently erodes the individual's natural capacity for memory. The more we rely on records, the lazier the brain becomes in storing detailed data. Dependence on external aids has become an inescapable pillar of civilization. Today, the ability to memorize is no longer valued as highly as the ability to retrieve information from storage systems. The relationship between humanity and knowledge has inverted. From being the keepers of knowledge, we have become the managers and connectors of it. This paradox serves as a reminder that every revolutionary technology demands a trade-off from our very biological essence. Another profound consequence of writing is the shaping of linear thought. In oral communication, thinking often proceeds in leaps, connecting events based on situational associations. Conversely, the written word forces both author and reader to adhere to a strict order, beginning, middle, and end. The act of setting pen to paper is a process of organizing chaotic ideas into a systematic logical flow. This not only facilitated societal governance through laws and administrative records, but also invisibly compelled the human mind to think within a specific framework. We are not merely recording thoughts. Our thoughts are being molded by the structure of writing itself. Consider the explosion of ancient mathematics to witness this power. Ancient mathematicians could not perform complex astronomical calculations with the biological brain alone. When they began to record numbers, symbols, and steps of calculation on clay tablets or papyrus, they inadvertently created an extended brain. These written strings allowed them to double back, check each step, identify errors, and expand concepts beyond the limits of intuitive thought. Without the technology of writing, the great architectural wonders or deep insights into the motion of the stars would have remained forever beyond human reach. Writing was the lever that allowed human intelligence to make leaps that were previously unimaginable. The need for data storage birthed an entirely new culture, the culture of archiving. Ancient libraries like Alexandria were not merely warehouses for books, but testaments to the human desire to possess the totality of knowledge. This was the moment humanity realized that knowledge is power, and that power lies in controlling access to those repositories. Compiling knowledge not only preserved the experience of predecessors, but transformed it into an inheritable asset. The formation of a collective memory across generations is proof of the immortality of knowledge. An individual in the 21st century can read the thoughts of a philosopher from 2,000 years ago, standing on their shoulders to see further, all thanks to characters preserved across time on information media. Writing has even profoundly impacted how we perceive ourselves. Today, a person's identity is no longer defined solely by their appearance or actions, but by the collection of records, degrees, certificates, and the digital footprints we leave behind. We define ourselves through words, through texts that validate our capabilities and identity. This abstract information has become an inseparable part of the definition of the self, creating a new layer of identity, an information-based identity. This confirms that writing is not just for recording the world around us. It is a key instrument in constructing the very concept of the I. Ultimately, writing is the tool that defines the human identity. It allows us to transcend the limits of an individual lifespan to participate in a millennium-spanning project called civilization. But as the accumulated volume of information has become overwhelming and complex, this very ability to store it poses a challenge of value. When everything can be recorded and preserved, how do we distinguish between precious data and noise? And more importantly, when society has reached the pinnacle of storage capacity, we require a system of economic values currency, to trade, quantify, and distribute that knowledge resource most effectively. This is the inevitable next step, when our intelligence is no longer used merely for recording, but for operating a world built upon flows of value. What are your thoughts on our increasing dependence on technology? In the near future, will artificial intelligence be the next form of writing, where machines do not just store, but think for us and make decisions based on humanity's vast data stores? Are we entering an era where the written word will become obsolete? Or is AI merely an upgrade to the external memory we began building thousands of years ago? Please share your personal perspectives on this issue. We look forward to hearing your insights in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on upcoming episodes where we will decode the mysteries of currency and the exchange of value, the keys that have shaped the prosperity of humanity today. Your support is the driving force for us to explore these fascinating slices of history together. The emergence of writing was not merely a technical advancement. It represented a monumental evolutionary threshold, a moment when human intelligence began to transcend the constraints of biological neural capacity. Before the first symbols were etched, the knowledge of our ancestors was confined to individual memory and oral transmission. This method was akin to a melody that existed only as long as the voice resonated. Once the storyteller fell silent, the narrative either vanished or suffered distortion through the lens of the listener. The history of writing is the history of breaking those chains, allowing humanity to forge an eternal external memory, a foundation for a civilizational evolution that exploded with a velocity unseen in natural history. Science is the field that most clearly demonstrates the power of written technology. Without the precision of textual transmission, breakthroughs in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine would be trapped in an endless loop. Each generation, rather than standing on the shoulders of giants, would be forced to struggle with rediscovering the fundamental truths already grasped by their forebears. With writing, knowledge became a cumulative entity. Complex calculations, observations of celestial movements, and medicinal formulas inscribed on clay, papyrus, or parchment formed an indefatigable library of heritage. Progress ceased to be a series of isolated, tentative steps. It became a continuous stream, where today's innovations are built upon the verified foundations of yesterday. Moving beyond pure knowledge, writing fundamentally transformed social governance and trade networks. In primitive societies, trust was limited to the village or small communities where people could see one another face to face. However, the advent of written contracts extended these boundaries across thousands of miles. Merchants from distant lands could now conduct transactions through clay tablets bearing detailed terms, validated by seals and signatures. This was a turning point in social management, as trust shifted from a basis of personal emotion to the legal reliability of the written word. These contracts acted as the invisible threads connecting cultures, fostering an exchange not just of goods, but of ideas, languages, and customs. The development of legal systems serves as vivid proof of the power of writing. The arbitrary, imposing dictates of kings or local chieftains, once codified, were transformed into legal systems capable of uniform application across an entire territory. When law exists in writing, it becomes immutable and equitable, no longer dependent on the whims or biases of the ruler at any given moment. This created the social stability essential for great civilizations. Citizens now understood the boundaries of their rights and obligations, establishing a social mechanism governed by rules rather than raw power. This was the foundation for the transition of power from physical force to the influence of knowledge management systems. Even more significant is the shift of knowledge from an individual trait to a systemic one. In the past, those who held knowledge were extraordinary individuals, possessed of prodigious memory or innate communicative ability. But with the appearance of text, knowledge was liberated from its dependence on the human body. It became the property of society at large, preserved in libraries, academies, and educational institutions. Learning was no longer a process of person-to-person replication, but an interaction with objective resources. Knowledge could now exist independently, waiting to be discovered by anyone capable of reading and understanding. This gave rise to a new intellectual class, individuals who shaped social thought based on the analysis and comparison of data rather than merely following traditional dogma. The capacity for criticism and debate based on text is the most brilliant fruit of this technology. When knowledge is written down, it becomes an objective subject for all to examine, verify, and critique. An idea, once committed to paper, can be questioned by future generations, analyzed from every angle, and interrogated for its weaknesses or absurdities. This was the prerequisite for the formation of the modern scientific method. Debate was no longer a series of endless quarrels, but a systematic discussion where each argument was weighed against stored evidence. It is from this constructive skepticism that humanity has taken giant leaps in understanding the natural world and itself. However, the dependency on a knowledge storage system also carries significant risks. History has witnessed the collapse of many empires, not just due to war, but due to the loss of their knowledge management systems. When great libraries, such as that of Alexandria, are razed or vital texts are lost, an entire civilization can lose its direction. Systems of power and social stability, built upon legal texts and administrative wisdom, rapidly disintegrate. A civilization without writing, or one that loses access to its own storehouse of knowledge, is like a body that has lost its memory, reverting to a state of chaos and vulnerability to the fluctuations of the era. Ultimately, the ability to store information through writing has allowed humanity to accumulate knowledge faster than any biological evolutionary process. Genetic evolution unfolds over tens of thousands of years, requiring thousands of generations to alter fundamental adaptive traits. But with the aid of text, a technical or philosophical idea can be transmitted and applied within a single lifespan. This is the greatest turning point, when cultural technology, what we call civilization, surpassed genetic evolution in shaping our future. Humanity no longer waits for the changes of nature to adapt. We shape our own habitats, management styles, and thought processes at will through the accumulation and transfer of knowledge. It can be said that writing is not merely a tool for recording, but the medium through which humans define their very identity. From the first scratchings on animal bone to the lines of code in the digital age, we are writing a gargantuan external memory, preserving all the sorrows, hopes, and wisdom of our species. But as society reaches such unparalleled capacity for data storage, the need for a system of coordination, a common language to value that knowledge and the fruits of that labor, becomes more urgent than ever. As information becomes standardized, we require a tool to measure and exchange value, the premise for the emergence of complex economic systems. In this ceaseless flow of information, could AI become the next iteration of writing, a memory that exceeds anything we have previously imagined? Share your thoughts on the future of information, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter to receive our next documentary episodes, where we will decode the mysteries of currency and the exchange of value, the keys that have shaped the prosperity of humanity today. Your companionship is the driving force that allows us to explore these fascinating slices of history together. Human evolution reached a new threshold the moment we mastered the technology of written record-keeping. This shift presented a profound dilemma. How could value be transferred equitably among strangers without the burden of a cumbersome administrative apparatus? Tracking debts through writing was merely a precursor. Ancient societies required a common unit of measure to ensure that value could circulate more fluidly than through isolated inscriptions on clay shards. From this necessity, the concept of value began to detach itself from physical objects. Writing allowed humanity to document ownership with precision. From this, the primitive forms of currency emerged as surrogates for that ownership. Once information was controlled and codified, society transitioned into a new era of trust. We no longer placed our faith purely in individuals. We placed it in record-keeping systems and the instruments that represented value. Currency is, in essence, a specialized form of writing, one that contains information regarding value and the collective commitment of a community. The birth of money was not merely an economic evolution. It was the maturation of the information control process that writing had initiated. It transformed abstract commitments into exchangeable data, enabling the expansion of transactions far beyond the boundaries of familiar acquaintance. The connection between stored information and trust in the future is the core foundation of civilization. If writing constructed the framework of society, then currency served as the adhesive that bound humanity together through complex transactions. opening a new chapter for our species' extraordinary development. Writing was the milestone that transformed us from isolated individuals into links within a grand system, where information became the fundamental unit for operating the world. Through the archiving of data, humanity redefined its very identity. This evolution poses a challenging question for the future. Will AI become the next iteration of writing? A stage where information is not merely stored, but actively orchestrates the systems of economic value itself.